Today I want to share a story that permanently changed the way I view privacy and the quiet safety of home. It happened to me last year, and even now, living hundreds of miles away, I still get a cold, sickening feeling whenever I look out a window late at night. I live in a quiet, relatively new suburban development, the kind of place where nothing ever happens. My house backs up onto a dense patch of woods, not a state park or anything, just a thick, unkempt boundary line that separates our neighborhood from the next town over. When I bought the place, I loved the idea of having that natural buffer. It felt secluded, almost private, especially the large wooden deck that juts out into the backyard. For the first 2 years, it was peaceful, just the sound of crickets and the occasional deer rummaging around. But then things started to feel watched. It began subtly, around 3 in the morning, always on nights when the moon was hidden. I'd be sleeping, and I'd be woken up by my dog Buster, a usually lazy golden retriever, standing rigid by the back door, letting out this low, worried guttural growl I had never heard him make before. I'd get up, flip on the porch light, and see nothing. Just the deck, the lawn, and the impenetrable black wall of the woods about 30 feet away. I figured it was a raccoon or maybe a coyote. I'd call Buster back to bed, and we'd both settle down, but the feeling of unease would linger until dawn. This happened maybe 3 or 4 times over a month. Each time Buster was more agitated. The porch light would flare up, and I'd stand there for a full minute, waiting for some movement, some explanation. But the woods remained silent and still. It was the regularity of it that started to bother me. It wasn't random, it was rhythmic, almost scheduled. I started going to bed earlier, feeling this creeping dread, knowing that sometime between 2:30 a.m. and 4 a.m., Buster would alert me to something that was definitely there, but always vanished the second the light came on. Finally, I decided I needed proof. I bought a high-definition motion-activated floodlight camera and mounted it high above the deck, angled directly at the tree line. That night, I made sure the house was secure, double-checked the camera settings, and went to bed feeling a little more satisfied secure. I was woken up at 3:15 a.m., not by Buster, but by my phone buzzing with a motion alert. I grabbed my phone, heart pounding, anxious, and immediately opened the live feed. The floodlight was on, bathing the deck in stark white light. The camera showed the empty deck, the lawn, and the dense woods. Nothing. I scrolled back to the recording. The motion trigger was right at the edge of the tree line, marked by a slight shimmering in the shadows, like something big had just moved quickly out of the frame. The camera had triggered the light, and whatever it was had reacted instantly, retreating before the light could illuminate it clearly. The next few days were quiet. I thought maybe installing the camera had been enough to deter whatever animal or person was checking out my property. But then the feed buzzed again. This time in the middle of the afternoon. I checked it. It was just a UPS delivery guy dropping off a package on the deck. I scrolled through the footage from the previous night, and that's when the subtle horror started to click into place. The 3 a.m. alert was there, showing the same quick retreat, but about an hour before that, the camera had picked up something else. It was brief, only a few seconds long. A pair of hands, gloved in dark fabric, reached up from below the railing of the deck. They didn't climb up. They just reached, slowly moving a small terracotta pot that usually sat near the grill. They rotated it about 45 degrees. Then the hands slowly disappeared back down into the darkness beneath the deck. I felt sick. This wasn't an animal. This was someone playing a calculated, terrifying game. They weren't trying to break in, not yet. They were testing my reactions, confirming I was asleep, and leaving behind subtle evidence that they had been there, watching. I immediately called the non-emergency police line. They sent an officer out, who was clearly indifferent, skeptical. He checked the perimeter, looked under the deck, which was too low to crawl under easily, but not sealed off, and suggested it was probably just kids messing around, or maybe a strong gust of wind. I showed him the video of the moving pot, and he just shrugged, saying it was too blurry to be conclusive evidence of a crime. He advised me to seal off the space under the deck and call back if there was actual attempted entry. I spent the next day securing the perimeter, boarding up the small gap beneath the deck and installing motion sensors around the entire house. I felt like I was fortifying a bunker. I was jumpy, constantly checking the camera app. But for a week, nothing happened. The relief was immense, almost intoxicating. Maybe my defensive measures had worked. Then came the weekend. My wife was out of town visiting family, and I was completely alone. I was trying to relax, watching a movie in the living room, when I heard a distinct, unnatural sound coming from the backyard. It wasn't the rhythmic thump from before. This was a high-frequency, almost electronic whine, like a cheap piece of surveillance equipment turning on. I froze. Buster didn't growl. He whimpered, scared, hiding behind the couch. I grabbed my phone, hands shaking, nervous, and opened the camera app. The floodlight did not immediately activate. I manually turned it on. The light flared, and the scene popped into view. Empty deck, empty lawn. But then I saw it. Standing right at the edge of the light, closer than they had ever been, was a figure. Tall, dressed completely in black, partially obscured by the shadows cast by the trees, but clearly visible. They weren't moving, just standing there, staring directly into the camera lens. And then slowly, the figure raised both hands. In one hand, they held a small, dark, rectangular device, maybe a phone, maybe a voice recorder. In the other, they held something lighter, something recognizable. It was the terracotta pot they had moved a week prior. The figure didn't move the pot this time. Instead, they used the dark device in their other hand to point directly at the camera. Then they slowly, deliberately waved goodbye, panicked. I screamed, a muffled, choked sound, dropping my phone on the carpet. The figure didn't flinch. They held the wave for a sickeningly long moment, then turned and simply melted back into the shadows of the woods. I didn't wait. I grabbed Buster, ran upstairs, locked myself in the bathroom, and called 911, shouting. I was hysterical, rambling about a man waving a pot and a camera. The police arrived quickly this time, maybe because I sounded genuinely terrified. They searched the backyard, the deck, and the woods for about an hour. Again, they found nothing. No forced entry, no footprints that weren't mine or the dog's, and the area under the deck was still sealed. But one of the officers, a younger guy who seemed a little more interested, noticed something odd on the deck railing. Taped to the underside of the top rail, facing the house, was a small weatherproofed microphone. It was designed to be almost invisible unless you were specifically looking for it. The officer removed it, bagged it as evidence, and confirmed it had been recording. The horrifying realization hit me. The person in the woods wasn't just watching me. They were listening to my reactions, my conversations, my entire life inside the house. They had been observing me patiently, waiting for the exact moment I was most vulnerable and most aware of their presence. The police investigated the microphone, but it was untraceable, cheap, off-brand electronics with no identifying marks. They suggested it was likely someone from the next neighborhood over, maybe a mentally unstable person who had found a new hobby. They never found the person, and they never found the terracotta pot. I sold that house 3 months later. I didn't care about the loss of money. I just needed out. The true horror wasn't the threat of violence or robbery, but the cold, calculated invasion of privacy. I often think about that final moment, the dark figure, standing just beyond the light, waving goodbye. It wasn't a threat to break in, it was a promise that they knew me, they had recorded me, and that even though I was leaving, they would always have the footage of the night they watched me, realize I was never truly alone. And that, more than anything, is what still keeps me up at night.